Okay, so you're here because you want to get smart on the big stuff, right? Really understand what's going on without, needing a PhD. Well, that's what we do. Today, we're diving deep into something that touches a lot of our lives, often daily, the global cocoa shortage, which, yeah, means we're talking about chocolate.
It really is fascinating, isn't it, how something like chocolate availability can open up these really complex global issues. What's happened with cocoa now is, well, it's a powerful example. You see, environmental pressures, economic systems, social factors, they all just collide. Our goal today is to kind of pull those threads apart for you.
Absolutely. Because you look at the headlines, you see the prices going up, you hear about farmers struggling. There's this feeling, isn't there, that the chocolate world is, well, shifting. We want to get past just that surface level, give you a clearer picture of what's really driving this. You might even have a few aha moments, realizing it's not just simple supply and demand. There's a much deeper story here.
Exactly. And understanding how it's all connected, that's really key. This isn't some temporary blip in the market. It's symptomatic of some pretty big underlying problems.
Okay, let's dive in then. This global cocoa shortage, how big a problem are we actually talking about? Is it minor or, something more serious?
Oh, it's definitely leaning towards the more serious end. I mean, the numbers for this current season, 2023-2024, they point to a global shortfall of around 374,000 tons.
374,000 tons. How does that compare?
We'll put it this way. The deficit the previous season was about 74,000 tons.
Wow.
So yeah, a really significant jump in that gap between supply and what the world wants.
That's a huge increase. And I mean, I've definitely felt it in my wallet buying chocolate lately. Is that directly linked?
Oh, absolutely, no doubt. Between July 2022 and February 2024, cocoa prices just surged like 136%. They hit over $10,000 per metric ton earlier in 2024.
10,000.
Yeah. And remember, just a few years back, prices were maybe around $3,000 a ton. So you see the scale of the increase.
Yeah.
It's inevitably hitting us, the consumers.
$10,000 a ton. That's staggering.
So where's the epicenter of this?
Yeah.
Geographically, I mean. Which regions are feeling it most?
It's clearly West Africa, specifically Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. Between them, those two countries produce something like 58% of the world's cocoa. That's huge.
Mm.
And right now, they're facing this combination of really tough challenges.
Mm.
A sort of perfect storm, you could say.
A perfect storm
Mm.
affecting cocoa. What kind of challenges are we talking about?
The main things are extreme weather patterns and widespread crop diseases, big outbreaks. Both of those are seriously impacting how much cocoa farmers can actually harvest.
So the higher prices, maybe less choice on the shelf, that's directly tied to these problems in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana.
Precisely. And it goes beyond just the price tag on a bar. Manufacturers might start tweaking recipes, maybe using less cocoa,
Right.
or looking at alternative ingredients to keep costs manageable. The whole chocolate landscape could genuinely change.
And this isn't just about, whether we get our favorite treat, is it? There are real people, real livelihoods involved here. Absolutely critical point. We're talking about over 5 million smallholder farmers. Their income depends on cocoa. This shortage, it's a very real threat to their economic stability, their communities.
So it sounds like this shortage is way more than just a temporary market glitch. It's pointing to something bigger, system-wide.
Exactly. It's a real wake-up call, isn't it? About how fragile our global farming systems can be, especially when you throw climate change and these existing economic inequalities into the mix.
You keep mentioning climate change. Can we dig into that? How exactly does it impact growing cocoa beans? Seems like such a traditional crop.
It's interesting, cocoa plants are quite specific, quite delicate in their needs. They like it just right. Temperatures usually between 20-30 Celsius, high humidity, reliable rain. Climate change is basically messing with that balance in a few ways.
So the just right conditions are becoming less reliable.
That's a good way to put it. In West Africa, what we're seeing is more frequent, more intense heat waves and longer droughts, too. This really stresses the cocoa trees, makes them weaker, more vulnerable to disease, and ultimately, they just produce fewer beans. The recent El Nino pattern, that made it even worse, led to the worst drought they've seen there since 2003.
Okay, so heat and drought are bad, but I guess too much rain isn't good either.
Exactly right. Too much rain, flooding, that can be devastating, too. It directly damages the crops, obviously. But it also creates the perfect damp conditions for fungal diseases to just take off.
So it's either too dry or too wet, a real tightrope for the farmers.
It really is. And the long-term forecasts, they're pretty concerning. The International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIET, they estimated West Africa could lose up to half its current cocoa growing land by 2050.
No, 50%.
If temperatures keep rising like they are, yeah, that's the projection. It's quite alarming.
That is alarming. And you said climate change also makes pests and diseases worse.
Yes, it sort of turbocharges those biological threats, like the cocoa pod borer. It's a major pest in places like Cameroon, Southeast Asia. It can wipe out over 50% of a harvest. Warmer temperatures, different humidity levels. They can help these pests thrive, maybe even spread further.
And what about those diseases you mentioned earlier? Black pod rot sounded nasty.
Oh, it is. It's caused by a fungus, Phytophthora. Loves wet conditions. So the heavy rains in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire late last year, perfect storm for black pod rot outbreaks. That definitely contributed to this current shortfall.
Yeah.
Then you got cocoa swollen shoot virus, CSSV, spread by little insects called mealybugs.
Okay.
And guess what? Mealybugs also tend to do better when it's hotter and more humid. NOAA, that's the U.S. agency, they estimate CSSV has already killed something like 200 million cocoa trees in West Africa.
200 million trees just from one virus. That's incredible.
It really shows the scale, doesn't it?
Yeah. Are there ways for farmers to fight back against these things? Pesticides, maybe?
Well, yes, there are pesticides and fungicides, but the cost, that's a huge hurdle, especially things like the copper-based fungicides for black pod rot. They can be really expensive. For small farmers already working on tiny margins, often it's just not affordable.
So the farmers hit hardest by the problems are often the ones least equipped to pay for the solutions. That feels deeply unfair.
It really is. It highlights this inherent vulnerability. And we should probably also mention, the way cocoa is farmed sometimes, it actually contributes to climate change itself through deforestation.
How does that work? I wouldn't naturally link chocolate farming and cutting down forests.
Well, often, to meet the global demand for chocolate, new areas are needed for plantations. And that often means clearing existing forests, which releases a lot of stored carbon dioxide.
Right.
And it disrupts the whole local ecosystem. Between 2002 and 2019, Cote d'Ivoire lost about 25% of its humid primary forest. Ghana lost about 8%. A lot of that linked to agriculture, including cocoa.
That's a huge environmental price tag.
It is. And it can create this negative feedback loop. Deforestation degrades the soil over time, makes it less productive. So farmers might then feel they need to clear more forest for new trees. It just keeps going. And it messes with local weather patterns, too.
Wow. It really feels like peeling back layers of an onion here. So many connected issues. Let's go back to the price. We see these record high global cocoa prices. Are the farmers growing the beans actually seeing any benefit from that?
That's a really, really important question. And the answer, sadly, is often no, not really. In Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the government set these fixed farm gate prices.
Farm gate prices.
Yeah, it's a price paid at the farm. And it's usually based on sales agreements made in previous seasons. So even when the global market price rockets past $10,000 a ton, like in 2024, the farmers themselves, they might only be getting, say, $1,600 to $1,800 per ton.
That's a massive gap. They're producing this incredibly valuable thing, but getting so little of the actual value.
Precisely. There was a fair trade report. Really stark statistic. It said the average Ghanaian cocoa farmer earns just $6 from a $100 chocolate bar.
$6 out of 100.
Yeah. And most cocoa farmers in West Africa live below the World Bank's extreme poverty line. That's $1.90 a day. It just highlights their economic vulnerability. And this structure is not new. It has roots in, old colonial trade patterns, raw materials sourced cheap, value added elsewhere. Those patterns still echo today.
$6. That's shocking. And it makes perfect sense then why they struggle to afford pesticides or better equipment, like you said.
Exactly. It's a cycle of poverty. It means they can't invest back into their farms. They can't afford to replace old, diseased trees with newer, maybe more resilient ones. Can't afford fertilizers or better farming techniques.
And I bet the costs of farming fertilizer tools, those aren't exactly going down either.
No, quite the opposite. They're generally rising. Farmers face higher costs for everything they need: fertilizers, pesticides, equipment. Plus, you've got wider issues like inflation, currency devaluation in their countries.
Yeah.
It all adds up. Like we mentioned, those fungicides for black pod rot, often prohibitively expensive.
So income is low, costs are rising. It's a really tough economic situation. What about getting help, like loans or credit?
Another big challenge, most cocoa farms are small, under 5 hectares, often. These farmers usually don't have the collateral or maybe the financial paperwork the banks need for loans.
Right.
So no access to credit means no money for crucial investments, like better seeds or maybe irrigation systems, things that could really boost their yields and income.
It really sounds like the whole global cocoa trade is just tilted against the farmers from the start.
I think that's a very fair way to put it. I mean, look at the whole industry. It's worth over $100 billion a year globally, but it's dominated by just a handful of large multinational corporations.
Hmm.
They control the processing, the manufacturing, the brands we buy. West Africa grows most of the beans, but receives only about $10 billion of that total value.
So almost all the money generated is captured further up the chain.
Exactly. And the fact that these countries mostly export raw beans, not processed chocolate, that limits their economic benefit too. There was that initiative, the Living Income Differential, the LID. That was meant to help farmers directly, wasn't it? How did that pan out?
Right, the LID. I remember hearing about that. What happened?
Well, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire brought it in back in 2019.
Hmm.
It was meant to be an extra $400 per ton paid directly to farmers, a premium on top of the price. Good intention, definitely. But the implementation, it's been tricky. Kind of weak, honestly. You got bogged down by things like market complexities, enforcement wasn't always consistent. Critics basically say, look, without bigger systemic changes to make trade fairer overall, these kinds of premiums, while helpful, won't fundamentally change the game for farmers. They're still exposed to all that market volatility.
So maybe a step, but not the whole solution. This really leads us into some heavy social and ethical issues too, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And one of the most persistent, most concerning issues is child labor.
Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot with cocoa.
Sadly, the numbers are still incredibly high. Estimates are around 1.6 million children working on cocoa farms just in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana.
1.6 million, that's awful. Why is it still so common, even with efforts to stop it?
It really boils down to economic desperation, extreme poverty. Families just can't afford to hire adult workers, so they end up relying on their children for help on the farm, often doing tasks that are demanding, sometimes even dangerous. And it means those kids aren't in school.
And it ties right back to the low incomes we were just talking about, if farmers earned a decent living.
Exactly. If they were paid fairly, they wouldn't be forced into that situation. When you're earning as little as maybe 78 cents a day, like some farmers are, you just don't have the money for hired help, or often even for school fees. Now, there are groups like the Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade. They have systems trying to monitor and tackle child labor. But the problem persists because that underlying economic pressure, that inequality, it hasn't gone away.
It puts us as consumers in a difficult spot, doesn't it? We like affordable chocolate, but nobody wants it to come from child labor or environmental harm.
It's a real tension, and consumer awareness is growing. People are more concerned about where their food comes from. Think about the carbon footprint, too. A standard milk chocolate bar, maybe 200 grams, has a footprint around 200 grams of CO2 equivalent. Dark chocolate, often more, up to 300 grams sometimes. And big companies like Mondelez and others, they face scrutiny, allegations about wages, ethical sourcing. It really underscores the need for much more transparency right through the supply chain.
So, what can we actually do as consumers? Does choosing sustainably sourced chocolate really move the needle?
It can, yes.
Yeah.
When enough people choose certified sustainable or fair trade chocolate, it sends a message to the industry. It shows there's demand for ethical practices. That can encourage more companies to adopt better standards, pay fairer prices. But, getting everyone to switch, that's a challenge. And ultimately, we still need those bigger systemic industry changes for real lasting impact.
Right. It's clear this shortage isn't just a blip. It's causing these huge ripple effects. We talked farmers, consumers. What about the economies of whole countries?
Oh, it's a major threat to their stability. Take Cote d'Ivoire. Cocoa is like 14% of their entire GDP, supports millions of jobs. When yields drop, when prices swing wildly,
Yeah.
it hits their export earnings hard, makes poverty worse. It could even potentially lead to social unrest down the line. Look at Nigeria, used to be a huge cocoa producer. But years of neglect, underinvestment, now their output is way down, aging trees, low productivity. It's a cautionary tale.
So it really can undermine the economic health of nations. And for us, besides higher prices, how else might we see this shortage play out?
Well, like we touched on, manufacturers might use shrinkflation, smaller bars, same price,
Ah, yes.
or just more straightforward price hikes. And then there's reformulation, changing recipes to use less cocoa, maybe adding other fillers or flavorings to compensate.
That might explain why some things taste different lately. What about the smaller chocolate makers? The craft guys?
Yeah, they often feel the pinch even more. Small, artisanal chocolatiers, they don't have the buying power of the big corporations. They can't easily hedge against these massive price swings. So they might be forced to raise their prices significantly, maybe lose customers, or shift focus, maybe reduce their product range just to survive.
And let's not forget the environment, beyond just cutting down trees.
Right. Continued deforestation means loss of biodiversity, more carbon emissions. That's ongoing. Plus, the way farming is often done. Overuse or misuse of pesticides, fertilizers that can pollute water, degrade the soil over time, makes future farming harder, harms the local environment. There are regulations trying to tackle this, like the EU's new deforestation rules. They aim to ban imports linked to recent deforestation, which is good in principle, but it could also add costs and paperwork for farmers and exporters, especially small ones. It's complicated.
It definitely sounds like we need solutions that tackle all these angles at once. What are the promising ideas out there for a more sustainable cocoa future?
You're right, it has to be multifaceted, no silver bullet. But there are promising avenues. A big focus is on promoting sustainable farming practices.
Like what, for example?
Things like agroforestry. That's where you plant cocoa trees, among other crops, shade trees. It's much better for soil health, can reduce pests naturally, boosts biodiversity, and it stores more carbon. Then there's climate-smart agriculture, CSA. Using techniques like mulching, cover crops, adjusting planting times, helps farmers adapt to weird weather, can increase yields and lower emissions. Also, integrated pest management, using natural predators, resistant plants, only using chemicals very sparingly when absolutely needed. It's a smarter approach.
Okay, those sound good. What about making the cocoa plants themselves tougher, more resilient?
Yeah, that's another key area. Breeding programs are working on climate-resilient varieties, looking for traits like drought tolerance or resistance to pests and diseases like black pod or CSSV. They've had some success. Drought-tolerant hybrids, CSSV-resistant strains exist. But the big challenge is getting these improved seedlings to the smallholder farmers. That takes investment, infrastructure, distribution networks.
And we keep hitting that economic wall for farmers. What about solutions on that front, getting them a fair price?
Absolutely crucial. Ensuring a living income is fundamental. Things like paying premiums for sustainable cocoa, fair trade certifications, direct trade relationships, they all help. But we need more coordination. Governments, chocolate companies. They need to really strengthen policies like the LID and tackle those deeper inequities in how the global trade actually works.
Just giving farmers better knowledge and skills seems like a no-brainer, too.
Well, totally. Training and education programs are vital. Initiatives like Cocoa Life, the Cocoa Fertilizer Initiative, they teach sustainable methods, pest management, soil health. Also, helping farmers diversify, grow other crops alongside cocoa. That gives them a safety net, reduces reliance on just one volatile commodity.
I also read something about processing the beans in the countries where they're grown. How does that help?
Why not? That could be a game changer, potentially. Promoting local processing, adding value locally. If countries like Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana could process more beans into cocoa liquor, butter, powder, even finished chocolate, they'd capture a much bigger slice of that $100 billion pie. But again, it needs big investment in factories, in skills, in market access. There's this concept of fair-made chocolate where everything, bean to bar, happens in the origin country. That's a really interesting model.
And finally us, the chocolate eaters. We have a role too.
We absolutely do. Becoming more aware, making conscious choices, looking for those certifications, fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, others. Supporting brands that are transparent about their sourcing and committed to ethical practices. Our demand can genuinely push the industry toward better standards. Certifications help, but we also need to keep demanding that transparency for the big players.
It seems there are even some maybe more radical innovations happening too.
Yes, some really interesting stuff in food tech.
Yeah.
Companies developing cocoa-free chocolate using things like fermentation to mimic the flavor.
Wow.
Others working on sustainable sugar alternatives, because sugarcane farming also has links to deforestation. So lots of innovation. The key is making sure these new things are developed in a way that supports, rather than potentially displaces, the millions of existing cocoa farmers. It's a balance.
This has been incredibly insightful and, yeah, pretty sobering at times. It's so much more than just we might run short on chocolate bars.
Exactly. It's this tangled web, isn't it? Environmental pressures, climate change hitting yields, driving diseases, deep economic unfairness leaving farmers trapped in poverty, and serious social issues like child labor still persisting. It's all interwoven.
And the stakes feel really high. Economic stability for whole regions, ongoing environmental damage, and yeah, the future of something familiar, something many of us enjoy, potentially changing dramatically.
But, like you said, let's end on hope. There is real potential. Sustainable farming works. Resilient cocoa varieties exist. Fair trade models can make a difference. Consumer awareness is growing. These are all pathways to build a better, more resilient, more ethical cocoa sector. It is possible.
So it really comes down to investing in farmers, supporting local value addition, Embracing innovation.
Exactly. It needs everyone pulling together, farmers, governments, companies, researchers, and us as consumers. A real collaborative effort.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive, thinking about everything we've covered, the climate, the economics, the social side. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What single change do you think would make the biggest positive difference for the future of cocoa? Definitely something to chew on next time you reach for some chocolate.